All right, hello, and welcome once again to White Lotus of Light educational series. I'm not sure how long this is going to be. I'm shooting for 45 minutes, but I wouldn't be surprised if it goes a little longer. It could even go a little bit shorter. It's just me today, and I'm just going to talk about something that I've been seeing more and more in sort of the truther community, and that is this sort of reactionary mistake that people are making, that they're conflating authority with reason or science. Just because we've discovered that the authorities have lied to us about a ton of stuff does not mean that we should abandon reason, logic, and the scientific method. That is not the same as Pfizer and Moderna or big major scientific-based corporations. It is the scientific method, which is an extremely useful tool in order to understand how the laws of the universe operate. And in fact, it's a tool that has already been very much gathered into and under the fold of sort of the powers that be in the world. And that's the problem with science, not the use of science itself. And I'm concerned with what seems to be this phenomenon of a lack of discernment and a lack of use of logic and reason, and even common sense, I would say, that I see increasingly in the truther community. And the reason for that is because the head of the CIA back in 1981 during Reagan's first cabinet meeting said that we will know when our disinformation campaign is complete when everything the American public believes is wrong. Now, mind you, when Julian Assange was grabbed out of the Ecuadorian consulate or whatever it was in England, I believe it was Ecuador, he had just released a big info dump on the CIA. And among other things in there was that the CIA has a full-blown meme department. So when you see memes, you have the belief that it's some guy or gal who made that meme. But it may very well be that that meme has been made by an intelligence agency. In fact, I'd take it a step further, and I'd say most of the best, most hard-hitting memes that appear instantaneously after an event occurs are probably made by various intelligence agencies, because you can bet your bottom dollar that if the CIA had that, whatever it was, 6 years ago when Assange leaked that, 4 or 5 years ago, I don't remember how long ago, that other intelligence agencies also have it, and they probably had it for a while. Similar to a meme department was that with the internet, there was a proliferation of conspiracy theories, and what I often call the golden age of conspiracy theory, the late 90s. The reason I call it that is because basically all of those have come true at this point. Basically everything I read in the 90s on Wingnut websites that I didn't put a lot of stock in myself, I read it more as a novelty, and it was just titillating and weird, right? And then 9/11 happened. I had my whole wake up. I realized that there was lots of nonsense going on. And someone who I am basically certain was a government operative who was involved in he tried to convince me and other people who were in sort of the anarchist community in Eugene, I've always been very anti-authoritarian, to try and commit crimes, actual property crimes. And they succeeded and got some people to, not with me, but with, they succeeded in getting some people to like firebomb a Mercedes dealership or something like that, or BMW dealership, I forget what it was. And when I asked him one day, I was like, why don't you ever do these things that you're encouraging everyone else to? Oh, no, I'm part of leadership. I could get in trouble. And he had a girlfriend who looked like she was in her late 20s or early 30s. And anyways, this guy who was, he was one of the only people interviewed by the national media about the WTO riots, and him and his anarchist crew had disrupted what was up to that point very peaceful demonstrations by like people who were totally banal, like the Teamsters Union, various environmental groups, people who were worried about the third world being taken advantage of, who were all protesting against the WTF. These idiots go and they start breaking the windows on McDonald's and Starbucks. And then there was the first kind of lockdowns that happened under Bill Clinton, to where they had free speech zones and they were doing all sorts of stuff, and they were doing a level of oppression that really hadn't been seen in the United States at protests, since like the 60s. And that guy, right? And then 9/11 happened after that the WTO riots in 99 in Seattle. 9/11 happened a couple years later, to where I sometimes wonder if they didn't pull it off the shelf in part because people were waking up to the international global financial order shenanigans, right? But that same guy said to me days after 9/11, that there were hologram planes in New York. And I said, what? That doesn't make any sense at all. And of course, I knew people who were in New York on that day in Manhattan, and they felt the shock wave of a jet moving at a speed that's actually dangerous for pilots, right? In order to hit the World Trade Center. They felt the jet wash of the disturbed air. And they saw the plane go over their head, real as could be, and they saw it hit and crumple into the tower and all the rest. Now, what's interesting about that is I don't believe there was a plane on 9/11 at the Pentagon. So you put out this thing, hologram planes, and then at the same time, there's no video footage of what happened at the Pentagon. And if someone says, oh, there was no planes hitting the towers, hologram, and then I say, well, that's not true, but there wasn't at the Pentagon, there was not a plane. To a third party listening to that conversation, they're going to go, oh, these two are both idiots. They don't know what they're talking about. Everyone knows there was planes hit the towers in New York. We've all seen the video of it, right? That's why they do that. There was no planes in the hologram. Why? Because they realized with the internet that there was beginning to be the spread of information about, like, the JFK assassination, MLK, RFK, Malcolm X, right? All those assassinations. They realized that there was people who were talking about the Federal Reserve and the global banking cartel. They realized that there was people talking about chemtrails, right? About vaccines. Might piss off the algorithm with that one. I might have to blop that out. But people using that for Depop, right? That kind of like threw me for a loop there. There was basically even like black magicians, the Babylonian dark sorcerers ran the world, right? School shootings being faked. I saw all of that, all of those things in the 1990s, right? And that there was like UFOs and interactions with UFOs. That's the one thing that hasn't really come out, but even that is starting to come out, with the look at all the hearings they've had in Congress. So even that is being acknowledged to some degree. Sure, it's being spun in a specific way so that way they can control it. But if they have a meme department, you better believe that they have a fake conspiracy theory department. Think about that for a minute. I have a video on here. If you go back and look to the beginning of the year where I talk about the East Palestine disaster, the same day it happened, people who were in the truther community, who were my friends on Facebook, were saying nothing happened in East Palestine. I knew someone who lived in Ohio about, 50 miles or something from East Palestine. He sent me videos from his own phone of the cloud going up, and there was people claiming nothing happened. And that was during the period of time when the media wasn't covering it yet. So if you just bleed off 1% to 2% of people going down these rabbit holes that are fake, these red herring fake conspiracy theories, that's that many more people that are disengaged. If you get people fervently believing in a fake conspiracy theory, and trying to drum up new recruits, that's even better. Fake conspiracy theories abound, right? And I'm going to get into them, but I'll just actually, I'm going to get into that later. But one of the ways that I'm seeing this death of reason thing manifest is in this false dichotomy between the burden of proof fallacy and sea lioning. So sea lioning is where you're arguing with someone online. Could be a bot. There's lots of bots online. That's another thing people need to be aware of. Something like 75 to 85% of all internet traffic is bots at this point. Let that sink in. 75 to 85% plus of all internet interactions are bots. I'm not saying 75 to 85% of people you talk to are bots on Facebook, but they could be. They actually ran a test recently where they did the Turing test to determine if something was a bot or if it was a human being. And 60% of people failed to see the difference between a bot and a human being, a chatbot. Chatbots have become very sophisticated. And so, you know, there's the spam bots that just repeat the exact same trash on Facebook verbatim and on Twitter verbatim. But I'm talking about something much more sophisticated where they can have an actual back and forth with you. There's also agents who literally it's their job to sit there for 8-10 hours a day and they just do false bullshit on the internet to trick people. The first time I really experienced this en masse was during the Gulf water horizon. I ran into all these people who were just like, they would just say bullshit. And so what sea lioning is whether it's just an asshole, right? A troll who's a scumbag, worthless, like Redditor, idiot in his mom's basement when he's not on, you know, well, I better be careful because piss those guys off and have problems. But some antisocial idiot who is like, oh, I don't quite understand what you're saying. Could you say some more? And they get you to engage and they get you to like dredge up all these articles and all this kind of stuff, right? But they were bad faith, doing a bad faith argument all along, and they're trying to waste your time. Look up the term on Urban Dictionary, sea lioning, like a sea lion, those big things, right? Sea lioning. That experience of so much sea lioning happening for, again, whether it's trolls or actual disinfo agents, right? And I ran into this a ton with Gulf Water Horizon and a lot with 9/11 early on. It's just it was so prevalent with the Gulf Water Horizon disaster, especially on financial forums, that I realized it was clearly like an intelligence operation, whether it was run by British Petroleum or the British government or whatever. It was an intelligence operation. That became crystal clear to me. And there's people making constant bad faith arguments and getting me and others to spend an enormous amount of time. So this has resulted in people reflexively going to the opposite of false dichotomy of saying, oh, I can make an assertion and it's up to you to find it on the search engine. And if you don't, you're lazy. No. That's a burden of proof fallacy. The person who makes the assertion must be willing to back it up. Now, I get it. Sometimes you've read something, right? And you try and find it. It's very hard to find because they've scrubbed the internet. Google has delisted it, right? First of all, don't use Google unless you're looking up a sports score. You know, like it's worthless. It's good for sports scores and pornography. And that's about it. It's freaking hot garbage for something political or scientific that might touch on a corporate interest. Use Yandex, that's the Russian one, but be aware, there's a Russian bias there. Use Swiss cows, right? That's a total anonymous one. DuckDuckGo is a bit questionable, right? Brave browser, there's tons of other options. Don't use Google and rely on that if you're talking about conspiracy theory stuff, right? And you should be very suspect if a conspiracy theory thing pops up easily on Google. That's a pretty good sign that it might be one of these red herring conspiracies. Not necessarily, but very possibly. But I get it. So you read an article, you forget exactly what the title of the article was. You talk about it on Facebook and someone goes, source, right? And you can just imagine that it's that balding guy with the beard and glasses meme, right? Source, right? Where it's someone doing that sea lioning technique, which is very common among so-called leftists, right? So that's sea lioning. But now people in the truth community are responding to, oh, I don't have to prove my assertion. That's super dangerous because that just allows people to make whatever kind of crazy assertion and not have to back it up with a citation. Then it just, everything falls apart then because we're no longer operating in reason and rationality. We're operating in who's making the more convincing appeal to pathos, the appeal to emotion, the emotional appeal. And appeal to pathos is also a fallacy. You know, it's like the no true Scotsman. There's a whole list of fallacies, and I am going to take the time to put up a list of fallacies here. That's the one thing I'm going to add. I'm not adding a lot of pictures to this one. I'm trying to get this up quickly. And so, yeah, this sea lioning versus the burden of proof fallacy, where some people are bad actors, just like demanding all kinds of evidence, and you exhaust yourself, and they were never going to actually even be slightly open-minded. They're just trying to exhaust you, right? Whether it's an intelligence agent or just a good old-fashioned anti-social troll or a chatbot, doesn't really matter. That's happening in mass. And so people are responding to it and indeed are being pushed into responding towards it on the truther community of, you don't have to provide a citation for your assertion. That's trash. That's not how we do arguments if we're a reason-based people. People talk about how Western culture is under assault. Well, what's at the very foundation of Western culture? What's the bedrock of Western culture? Reason. Reason and logic. It starts in ancient Greece. People like Socrates, Plato, right? Logic. Logic and reason. And it's when these kinds of fallacies were first discovered and beginning to be categorized, right? And it just continued, right? The Enlightenment, you see a big surge in this again with the Renaissance and then the Enlightenment. That's reason. We're a reason-based civilization. If you're part of Western civilization, or really at this point, Eastern civilization, right? The undergirding modernity, perhaps better put to make it less about culture, right? Although Western culture being attacked does play into this and is worthy of consideration in its own right. But reason and logic underpins advanced societies. It has to. If things aren't rationally organized, they fall apart. And so this attack on reason and logic is at the very, very, very center of this attempted controlled demolition of society in order to rebuild it either into what will happen, the Luciferian order, or this Malachian, awful Malachian order. And they're hyper anti-reason across the board. They're hyper anti-reason. They want you just to be in a fearful state, reacting, regurgitating nonsense, right? You got to understand, we're in what's called fifth generational warfare. In fifth generational warfare, the primary battleground is the mind. That's the primary battleground in convincing you of things that are false. And everyone goes, well, obviously, I know that it's not safe and effective. I know the vaccine's not safe and effective, people will say. But then people will turn around and say that there's hydras in it. Remember that? Remember when there was the big hubbub about in the early stages when we could have maybe convinced people not to do this, that there was hydras in it? Now, why would they say there's transgenic hydras in it? Well, if you have a regular reasonable power microscope and you were to get a vaccine vial and pour it onto the slide and it had hydras, you'd be able to see that with a regular microscope. Compare that to graphene oxide, mRNA nanolipid enwrapped proteins or mRNA, right? Or graphene hydroxide razor blades, right? Which all three of those are components, one of which is about the nanolipid mRNA, right? And the other two, which are viable and I think reasonable that they may have been in there and that there's some evidence for that. You can't see that unless you have an electron microscope because they're nano-sized. But you could see a wiggly, squiggly hydra, which also has an ick factor. An ick factor or a sexiness factor is always something you got to be careful about. When Lahaina happened a little while ago, I was at first initially very troubled by this talk of that it was, what do you call those things? What's the acronym? Oh, DEWs, directed energy weapons. Then I saw enough evidence to where I was like, I think there's something to this. The reason I rejected initially is it sounds a bit like hologram planes or alien technology or nukes in the basement, right? Which I don't believe that any of those were used on 9/11. It could be, kind of doesn't matter, but I don't think so. But those are all very sexy, which brings me to the point of when you're newly awakened and realizing that you live in a world of inversion, you can first of all not want to be tricked anymore, right? You've been tricked your whole life thinking that these power structures that are in place are your friends and they aren't. And you're very angry. You're very angry and you're very distrustful. And because you distrust authority, you are suddenly aware that a bunch of stuff that you thought was one way is completely a different way. Then the second stage kicks in. Fortunately for me, this happened 22 years ago, but it did happen to me. you start getting a little cocky. I know something the sheep don't know. The sheep are so freaking stupid. You know, it's coming up in the playground. Psst, I know something you don't know. I know something you don't know. It's that kind of infantile mentality of, and again, happened to me too. It's this infantile mentality of, you know something that other people don't know. And isn't that cool? And the weirder it is, kind of the better, right? Because that means it's more on the fringe, which makes your belief and understanding of it that much more rare and coveted. It's rare and coveted knowledge, right? And I definitely felt this way for a while. I definitely felt superior to people and very angry. And like, I went down a lot of rabbit holes, some of which were sexy. And then I just realized that they didn't have any merit. And so, yeah, this reflexive distrust of authority to the newly awakened, plus that desire to know things that others don't, leaves you ripe for fake conspiracy theories. The classic one being hologram planes on 9/11, which dovetails into then that provides cover for the fact that there wasn't a plane at the Pentagon. Never have they released any video of the plane, despite it being the most heavily surveilled building on Earth, and there not being sufficient wreckage on the lawn, et cetera, et cetera. So let me give some examples of fake conspiracy theories. Of course, there's my favorite, the one that I talk about all the time, and I'm just going to, I talk about it a ton, so I'm just going to mention it once here. Flat Earth, obviously bullshit. Everything, all visual data, everything is rectified by simply acknowledging that we're on a generally spheroid-shaped thing hurtling through space, and the motion of the stars, planets, Venus, Burroughs, Alaska being dark for 24 hours a day, yada, yada, yada. There's a million trillion things that all are instantly rectified by that, right? So keep that in mind, flat Earth. Nukes aren't real is a new one I've seen recently. Very scary if nuclear weapons are going to be deployed soon, which kind of is what these all have in common. Viruses aren't real, or they aren't harmful, right? Birds aren't real. That's for like the extreme morons, the extremely easily duped. And it's probably like just mostly a joke, although there seems to be some amount of people believe it. They think all birds are government drones or something like that, right? That's for someone who's very paranoid and very low IQ, right? But I've even seen a new one. GMOs aren't real. Genetically modified organisms aren't real. Now you'll notice that what do these things all have in common? A few things. All of them are exceedingly difficult for you to determine with your naked eye, right? You can't see viruses. You can't even with a microscope see viruses. You can't really see GMOs unless you're doing gene sequencing, which who has access to that? You can't really tell that the Earth isn't flat unless you get very high up. And I know all the flat Earths will be like, it's not real to people in mountains and fish islands and blah, 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 and a laser over Michigan and all the rest, right? They might be lying about the size of the Earth, that it's much bigger than they say. That I could definitely see, but it kind of doesn't really matter. The point is, as a general rule, like there is space and there is stars and stuff, right? So GMOs aren't real. Viruses aren't damaging, right? You can't see viruses. You can't see GMOs. You can't see the Earth's not flat. Who has access to a nuclear weapon? So you can't see this. But what else do they have in common? If you think Earth is flat and there is no space, what does that let the elites do? That lets them weaponize space. That lets them put up an electronic grid to where they can monitor everything on the Earth from space. That lets them have space-based orbital weapons platforms. That lets them monopolize space, space mining, colonization, everything else that makes it a playground for the elites because you won't even acknowledge its existence. That's pretty handy. That's pretty nice. And again, there's never a payoff for Flat Earth for why they would have this vast 500-year conspiracy involving, hundreds of thousands or millions of astronauts and astronomers and stuff, right? So nukes aren't real. If a nuke goes off, they'll just say, well, it's not real. Some out of the truth community will be convinced that the nuke that they see isn't real, and then that lets them off the hook for their crime. GMOs aren't real. Oh, well, they're chalking our food with it. That way you're not going to resist it. You can't resist something you don't acknowledge. Like if you're like, well, thieves aren't real, and then you then therefore vote to get rid of your local sheriff because why would you need a sheriff to protect you if thieves aren't real? Then what does that do? The thieves go on an absolute rampage because there's no accountability, because in their little space, they get to go around and do whatever they want, right? So if GMOs aren't real, then that means why would you organize a resistance to GMOs or putting mRNA into food? Viruses don't exist. It's the same thing. We just had this giant global bioweapons attack. It was a setup for a much more lethal injected bioweapons attack, but they used the CRISPR. They put the corona, they put the spikes on it. Just as Luc Montagnier said, the spikes fell off, it became less deadly and just more transmissible, right? And then they got everyone to inject. But at first it was deadly, which scared people, right? At first it was quite deadly and it scared people. And then they knew that as it like Luc Montagnier, the Nobel Prize winner, discovered the shape of the HIV virus, said, the spikes would fall off. Now, I know there's stuff about Luc Montagnier and like Carrie Mullis and like, was HIV the real cause of AIDS? You know, and there's reason to be there's reason to look at specific ones and question it. But isn't this useful that there's this sudden idea, right? As there was this biological attack, that there's this sudden idea in the truth community to get people to say, oh, no, that's not real. And I always say, how certain of that are you? Are you willing to go into a biosafety level 4 lab, pull out a petri dish labeled Marburg virus and give it a lick? Now, I have met one person who said they would, but that's a level of certainty that I'll never have about anything ever, right? Like if Marburg operates the way it does and you were wrong, you're going to have a very short, very horrific, very nightmare life until you die. And that's a level of certainty I don't have about anything. I'm not willing to take that level of risk, even if it's something I don't. Like if someone said, if you're wrong about flat Earth, we'll kill your family. Are you certain about flat Earth? Well, no, I'm not that certain. I'm not that certain that the Earth is round to where I'm going to risk terrible death and injury, right? And the thing is that if you don't think viruses are real and they're releasing engineered weapon viruses, then that means you're not going to push back or investigate on it. And that's why it suddenly has so much popularity, and it reappeared in the public consciousness right around the time that the Rockefeller lockstep document came out, where they were in the final planning stages for 2020. So we have to have discernment. It's so important. And more than just discernment, we can't let reason and logic be lost. There's been a further and further and further move of reason and logic into fewer and fewer hands. You know, make irrational decisions about meme coins, what do you call those things? Cryptocurrencies, or like whatever kind of stocks, right? Let's follow the Wall Street Redditors, like Wall Street this, Wall Street that, right? People getting into it for hype and not looking at the underlying fundamentals, right? So it super benefits the elites if we as regular people abandon reason and logic and the scientific method in favor of what amounts to superstition. Because when you do that burden of proof fallacy where you make an assertion and you don't have to back it up, that's super awesome for these people who are making fake conspiracy theories. That helps get more people wasting their time on the fake conspiracy theories, while meanwhile important things are happening and people aren't looking into it, right? People aren't looking into, say, corruption going on in Ukraine, right? People aren't looking into whether we've been lied to about various other countries or our own country, or whether there's corruption going on in our own country because people are too busy chasing down these sexy conspiracy theories rather than looking at things like FTX and the collapse of FTX and what did that have to do with the political funding. What about the ETHgate around Ethereum, which seems to involve the Chinese government, right? People aren't interested in those when there's much sexier conspiracy theories out there for them to look into. So you start to dilute and ruin that. And if you take it a step further and get so reflexively anti-authority that you throw reason and logic out, the baby with the bathwater, then you're utterly ripe for future propaganda. All someone has to do is come up with something that's fake, that is in opposition to the mainstream, and people buy a hook, line, and sinker. That's literally all it took. It wasn't what they were saying on MSNBC. I'm smarter than the sheep. I'm smarter than the NPCs. I better get on Facebook without doing it. And if someone questions me, I'll just write, well, I don't have, you better what? You're too lazy to use a search engine? Well, did you use a search engine to begin with? Did you find a citation? Did you verify that information before you passed it on? Or did you want to get those likes and that dopamine hit? For a lot of people, it's that they wanted to get those likes and that dopamine hit. And so what I'm saying is be a Pyrrhic skeptic. That's what I am, a Pyrrhic skeptic. And what that means is you allow for any possibility. But then the Pyrrhic part is that you use the fire of truth to burn away all the impurities, all the falsehoods. In other words, you're discerning and you use reason and logic to come to your conclusions. You have to ground this distrust of authority in reason and logic, because if you don't, you're going to end up getting duped by that exact same authority's intelligence agents, supporting the wrong thing, having wildly incorrect ideas that end up benefiting the very people you think that you're rebelling against. You're actually aiding them by bringing a cancer within the truther community of abandonment of reason and logic and burden of proof fallacy and things such as this, or worse yet, pushing actively false conspiracy theories, which drain the emotional energy, the material energy, and the effort of everyone who is involved in this and trying to push back against this bad authority. And so that's my show for the day. I just think it's so important that we not abandon reason and logic, because it's the foundation of Western civilization and modernity. And if we abandon it, then we're screwed. Oh, and one last thing I want to say is that Cass Sustein was this anti-conspiracy theory guy in the Obama department, and he said we need to infiltrate truther movements. And he said this way back in the beginning of the Obama administration, specifically about 9/11, but obviously you can extrapolate that to all. His number one method of dealing with it was to basically infiltrate these movements. This was right around the time that flat Earth and viruses aren't real came into existence. Just something to think about. So always listen to your inner guide. Don't listen to me or any external authority, but also don't throw away expert opinions just reflexively. Weigh them and evaluate what they're saying. Because, for example, Robert Malone is an expert. He's going against the mainstream, but he's an expert and his opinion's worth looking at. Same thing with Dr. McCullough. These are experts. So people still rely on experts. But the problem is that people are reflexively throwing out any and all expertise, any and all understanding and logic and reason. So it's time that we start being more disciplined and more discerning in what kind of information we propagate. It's very important because we're in the midst of fifth generational warfare, where information is the primary battleground, and trying to get people's consciousness and minds is the key, and deeper the soul, right? Because this is ultimately a spiritual struggle. So keep an open heart, keep an open mind, but we must have a rebirth of logic and reason in order that we might move humanity forward in a positive direction. Much love to you, brothers and sisters. And for anyone who's looking for a little additional guidance, I will be offering at least till the end of the month and possibly to the end of the year. It depends on when I become under contract, which I know I've been saying this for months, and literally I've been waiting for months to get this finalized. It's just very complicated. And so during that period of time, I will still be offering astrology charts, but I will reach a point where I'm only doing one, maybe two a month, if that. And so if you would like to get what I consider to be my marquee skill is Vedic astrology. If you'd like to learn about your karmas, if you're under 40, there's the natal chart. And if you're over 40, there's the Navamsa, and the natal chart does carry over post 40, and it is very informative and helpful. So I offer combined charts, but the Navamsa is particularly useful for people like myself who are over 40 and who have moved into that more matured, the fruit of the tree, as they describe it. I have a video called Natal versus Navamsa chart that goes into more depth, but you can learn about your karmas and events that are going to unfold for you and when they're going to unfold. When will I meet that partner? When's a likely time to meet that partner? When am I likely to see my career advance? When am I likely to welcome a child, right? These are some of the things. When will, if I have a Dana yoga, a yoke of destiny that shows that I'm going to be wealthy, when is that likely to be activated based on the Mahadasha or major planetary period where that planet's karmas are ripening? These are some of the things we can go on. I also help a lot of people with spiritual guidance. I've been especially helping men who, I mean, I can certainly help women, but I've been helping a lot of men in particular. That's just who's been being called to work with me around trauma, and helping to heal that and get spiritual guidance in general about finding meaning in your life from a spiritual point of view. I also will be doing angelic magic courses sometime, probably in January would be my guess, of 2024. And so if you are interested in some guidance, I am available and ready to serve, and you can help my family, and I will certainly help you and yours. And so that's it for today. Thank you. Much love, and see you next time. All right. Bye-bye.